Hi guys, welcome back for the final video lecture of Fahrenheit 451, and we're going to discuss the scene Civilization is Bombed. In this video lecture, we will interpret Bradbury's theme on the importance of remembering, interpret the allusion to the phoenix, which is representing Montag's transformation and the transformation of a society, compare the phoenix allusion to the fire motif and its dual meaning of destruction and creation, and also compare themes in the book of Ecclesiastes to Montag's own character development. So we'll start first with a brief recap of this last section of the novel. So it opens up with Montag talking to Granger about his wife, and again mentioning that he doesn't feel that he misses his wife, and that if she were to die, he probably wouldn't even cry. Granger tries to comfort him, basically saying that everyone must leave something behind. It reminds him of his own grandfather, who, when he died, he was so upset, but he realized that part of the reason he was upset when his grandfather had passed was because his grandfather had done so many great things. So a lot of what he missed about his grandfather was the actions that he had in his life, the things that he did in his life. And in this short story, Granger suggests that what is most important in life is that we change the world in some way, that we make the world, and in some way, a different place it was than before we got here. So Montag thinks about, what has he done at this point to change the world, and he realizes he's only left ashes behind so far. He admits also that Millie never did anything, right? She never did anything with her hands except for watch her episodes and watch her TV. And he realizes that he's not left behind anything but ashes. So as they're talking, the war begins and ends in an instant. The city's bombed and completely destroyed. There's a huge aftershock. All of the Montag and the outcasts are thrown down on the ground. There's wind. Their lips are chapped. Their noses are bleeding. It's really, really intense moment. They get up. They see that everything is gone. It's disappeared. Montag just sort of instinctually yells out, "Clarice, Faber, Mildred, run!" And right after he does that, he realizes that Clarice has already died. Faber's probably on a bus by now, because remember, he went to go see a publisher. And Mildred probably just died. He even vividly imagines what Mildred's last few moments of life probably were. He pictures her in this hotel room, and then right before everything's destroyed, she sort of looks in the mirror and she sees herself for who she truly is before the ceiling comes tumbling down on her. And in that moment, he remembers Chicago. I met her in Chicago, because remember earlier on when we first were introduced to them as a couple, he and her didn't remember when they first met. And so he remembers in this moment that he first met her in Chicago. So they're all knocked down by the aftershock of the bomb, but they get up, and at this point, they turn back towards the city to see if anybody there needs help and to rebuild civilization. He also remembers part of the book of Ecclesiastes at this point, because he had forgotten it, and he was really discouraged with himself. He had tried to memorize as much as possible, but after the bomb, something about that moment brings it back to him, and he starts to recite lines of the book of Ecclesiastes. So for our study guide questions for this section, what becomes of Mildred once the bomb is dropped on the city? It's presumed that she's dead, right? So he suspects she's died, and it's probably what has happened. Granger explains to Montag what a phoenix is and what it can do. I have a picture in the top right. He explained how the phoenix is an appropriate metaphor for Montag. So a phoenix is a mythological creature that dies when it bursts into flames. However, it is then reborn from the ashes. So similarly, Montag's old existence dies and he is reborn. So it's sort of like a death by flames and then a rebirth afterwards, just like Montag. How does the reference to the phoenix give further meaning to the fire motif? So remember, in the beginning of the book, the fire was all destruction, right? It was all destroying things. But by the end, when Montag meets the outcast and he sees the fire at the center and they're all joined around, sharing knowledge, sharing understanding, it's bringing warmth, it's bringing human connection. It's completely shifted in its meaning. So it reinforces the phoenix, reinforces the fire motif, and the extent to which the fire can bring about both destruction and creation, just like the phoenix, right? That you must first be destroyed to be reborn. So we're going to read this short excerpt on the book of Ecclesiastes, and our goal is to explain why Montag becoming the book of Ecclesiastes is a befitting choice. So remember, what I mean by becoming is that they've memorized the book, so they now are that book. They're responsible for sharing that book in the future with others. The book of Ecclesiastes. When Guy Montag meets Granger, he is introduced to a community in which each member is dedicated to learning a book by heart. Their purpose is to commit whole texts to memory and pass them down to future generations, surviving the dark age of atomic war and government censorship. Montag chooses the book of Ecclesiastes, a text from the biblical Old Testament, probably written about the 3rd century BC, narrated by the teacher who is traditionally considered to be King Solomon. Ecclesiastes is a wonderfully diverse collection of advice on matters including good and evil, temptation and vice, love and hate, vanity and wisdom. Along with the Old Testament books of Job, and Proverbs, Ecclesiastes is an essential part of the wisdom literature of early Jewish philosophy. A philosophical essay rather than a narrative or history, Ecclesiastes offers ambiguous, that means sort of gray area, not definitive, guidance about the nature of the world. Its tone changes throughout. It is merciful, skeptical, loving, cynical, sorrowful, ecstatic. As one of its most famous passages says, there is a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate. So, a bunch of different sort of contradictions in there. Ecclesiastes does not provide any easy answers, again, going back to that ambiguous guidance. Ultimately, this very short book is an endorsement of concrete human existence rather than dogmatic abstraction. And this is sort of the same thing that Granger had mentioned about what he learned from his grandfather. The teacher asserts that one should experience life as fully as possible, even if death and God's judgment are final. The use of simple and concrete imagery is a call to experience all one can while learning that the difference between good and evil is not to be fully divined by mere mortals. The prominent themes of wisdom and mercy in Ecclesiastes make the book a fitting choice for Montag to learn. This is not a text that lends itself to systemic answers. It is, in a sense, a book to stand for all books, which in their entirety give a loud chorus of voices, the voices that the firemen of Fahrenheit 451 wanted to extinguish in the first place. And I remember earlier from the book that when Montag had met Faber, he was worried that he would end up following Faber and just whatever Faber said, just as he had followed his captain. And he wanted to, at some point, be somebody who could think for himself. And I think part of, that's why it's so appropriate that he is the book of Ecclesiastes, so he can sort of learn to navigate these sort of ambiguous scenarios that he's going to face in life, rather than have these definitive answers that somebody else gives him and lose his power and give up his power and authority to somebody else. So why is Montag becoming the book of Ecclesiastes a befitting choice? Thematically, the book of Ecclesiastes concerns itself with wisdom and mercy, while providing no systemic answers for issues or ethics or morality. So throughout the book, he's been seeking wisdom, right? And mercy. Like, he, remember, has been responsible for burning countless books and libraries and people's homes. So to some extent, he is guilty in this system. So he is seeking not only wisdom, but also mercy for his past actions. And there's no clear-cut answer to some of the challenging, ambiguous scenarios he encounters in the text, right? So it's, he to some extent it feels loyalty to his wife, but then he also acknowledges the fact that she's not on the same sort of knowledge journey that he is. A lot of the scenarios that he finds himself in don't have a clear right and wrong path to take. Oh, that's it. So we're done. I hope you guys have enjoyed the book. Be sure to take the Google Form quiz. I have posted a Google Classroom, and enjoy the rest of your day or night.